Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon, and this is episode 151. Today we're covering the team needs for the top six picks in this year's 2023 NFL Draft. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
What is up, everybody? February 25th, 2023. We are officially 2 weeks away from Selection Sunday in college basketball. March Madness is right around the corner. We have some NBA news items that we will be discussing today as well, as we just resumed basketball after the All-Star break, and we are hopping right in to our NFL offseason content with the top team needs, just in general, from a roster standpoint, for the teams that have the top six picks in this upcoming NFL draft. But before we get started with Prospect of the Week, I have a couple announcements. Number one, since we last spoke, I went to go see Stephen A. speak here at the Moody College of Communication in Austin at UT, and I will be reading his book. So hopefully on the next podcast, I will be able to give you a review of his book. I'm sure it'll be awesome. Excited to learn a little bit about arguably the most famous and most recognizable TV personality, sports TV personality for sure, right now that is out there. Secondly, Longhorn Deep Dive, that is going to resume hopefully tomorrow. And I will be talking about, since I'm talking about the Longhorns who are in Austin, I decided that why not I talk a little bit about Austin's MLS team, Austin FC. They kicked off their season tonight. I'll be talking a little bit about Austin FC throughout this MLS season, since they are Austin's only professional sports team. And then just be on the lookout for more Patreon content coming soon, and make sure you're on our TikTok, you're on our social media, you follow us on Twitter, and you like and subscribe to our channel. You can find our podcast everywhere: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you like to watch and listen to your podcasts. Let's hop right into the content. We're going to start with Prospect of the Week. Did you have anybody in mind?
Yeah. So this week, you mentioned a lot of different sports kicking off. Obviously, it's this busy time of year, but it's also preseason testing in Formula One, and I've been tuning in really intently to that. They're doing it out in Bahrain. They basically do laps the entire day, testing out the cars, making sure they work properly, yada yada yada. This preseason testing, all 3 days, one team, one driver stood out in particular. It was Fernando Alonso of Aston Martin, two-time world champion. I've been critical of Fernando Alonso in the past of his aggressive driving style, but there's no doubt about it. When you put him in a competitive car, he has a chance to win world championships. And I don't know what the actual pace of the Aston Martin will be this year, but if this preseason testing is any indication, and they'll be right up there in the fight at the top of the midfield. And that's really exciting. Aston Martin was a team last year that wasn't even in the fight to start the year, was slowest on the grid by far to start the year. And, Lawrence Stroll, their billionaire owner that bought the team a few years back, has big expectations. He went out and got Fernando Alonso, two-time world champion, and now things are starting to pay off. And it's going to be interesting to see how things turn out, but I just wanted to give Fernando Alonso his credit because you don't really know how much longer he'll be in the sport. He's 42 years old. He's still driving at an extremely high level, but I just thought it was important to give him his praise.
Absolutely. And speaking of other sports that we'll be talking about on our Patreon side of things. College baseball has recently kicked off. Just last weekend. And I want to. This is one of the more fascinating athletes that I've ever seen. It's an ambidextrous pitcher for Mississippi State, a true freshman ambidextrous pitcher for Mississippi State. His name is Jurangelo Singhe, I believe is how you say his last name. It has a unique spelling to it. Forgive me if I mispronounced it. But this kid, true freshman, 19 years old, played his high school ball in Florida, was, underrated coming out of high school. He threw 4 scoreless innings in his first ever collegiate start this past Wednesday against Louisiana Monroe, a 14-3 Mississippi State victory. He was dominant. He struck out 7 batters, allowed just 1 hit in 4 innings, which he allowed no runs. He's actually a natural lefty, but he throws harder with his right hand, which is amazing. Ambidextrous, tops 90 miles per hour from both sides. He pitches lefty against lefty batters and righty against righty batters, and he's good from both sides. So as we sort of progress through the college baseball season, he'll certainly be a name to keep an eye out for. And if you haven't seen him yet, I just recommend you either go look him up and watch the highlights of his first couple outings, or you find a way to read up on him because he's a fascinating prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's the reason we decided to bring this segment back. Players like him are the reason we even decided to do the segment in the first place. Raw Prospect of the Week is made for guys like him. I'm not even going to try to say his name. But I mean, something like this is really going to push the sport forward. It's something that I've thought about before, but I didn't actually think it would happen in the near future. I would think I just thought maybe it would happen, at some point 10 years down the line, maybe someone would be able to do it, but it's happening right now and it's worth paying attention to. And in a few years, we're going to have a switch pitcher and a hitter slash pitcher in Shohei Ohtani in the
Right.
MLB at the same time. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
One more note before we move on. Spring training games have started. They just started yesterday, and the average time for the games, we had a full slate of games, spring training games today. The average duration of the game was down to 2 hours, 37 minutes with the pitch clock. The average in last year's spring training, 3 hours and 4 minutes. So that is 27 minutes of game time shaved off right there with the pitch clock. Now we'll see how it continues to progress. This is something that we talked about in episode 150 with all the rule changes, but it's something to look for. The only thing I worry about is games potentially being decided by the penalties incurred if you violate the pitch clock. Say you're down to your last strike and the batter accidentally, is not boxed by the 8-second mark, you could potentially lose a game on that. That's the only thing I really worry about. But so far, good reviews from the new rules in baseball, and we're about 34 days away from opening day. So sooner rather than later, we'll start to jump into our MLB content for 2023. But with all that being said, let's hop into NFL team needs 2023. We've been waiting to do this for a while now. Once we cover pretty much all the teams, that'll lead us right into our draft coverage. So I think it'll work out pretty nicely. And we'll start with the number 1 team, the team with the number 1 pick, the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, right, exactly. I put the lower third down at the bottom for the people watching on YouTube. The Chicago Bears, it's pretty simple. I think it's all about building that defense back up to where it needs to be. And then number two, making sure Justin Fields has the proper support around him for him to flourish. So for me, it starts with a front seven. I think you have a good baseline at corner and safety. You drafted a guy last year at safety that played pretty well for you, has a high ceiling. I can't think of his name at the moment, but I think the focus defensively should be on the D line and at linebacker. The Bears were absolutely abysmal stopping the run, and that was even before Roquan Smith left. Guys like Akeem Hicks leaving, um, it really took its toll on this team, and they were squishy in the middle, to say the least, and that really put their entire defense at a disadvantage. It's like they were playing with an arm tied behind their back because they couldn't stop the run. So everything else opened up to begin with, just because you had to put so much eggs in the basket of stopping the run. It just opened up everything else and put you in a horrible spot. So you have to address that first and foremost. D line, linebacker. And then my third need, I think you could consider wide receiver as well, but I put offensive tackle just because I think you can upgrade from the guys that you have at the moment. You have Riley Reef, kind of swing tackle, a veteran. I don't think you want to rely on him. Same with Braxton Jones, kind of a young guy, but I'm not overly impressed with what I've seen from him. Ten Jenkins, you drafted him to be a tackle, but has moved into guard full time now. So I don't see him moving back out to tackle anytime soon. And then you also have Larry Borum, who I don't think played good at all last year either. So tackle is a big need, and that's why I put that above wide receiver.
Yeah, I overall I think agree with you. Assuming that you are rolling with Justin Fields, which we will see what happens, but I believe as of right now, that seems to be their plan. Um, I think you spoke to what they specifically need on the defensive line in particular, that front seven. I put edge or pass rush as my just general need for the Bears. If you look at what they were able to do last year, and Matt Eberflus has alluded to this, saying the Bears need more versatility on their defensive line, particularly at the three technique defensive tackle position. Uh, he's described this position as the engine behind his particular defensive scheme. He's a
Right.
defensive coach. So whether it's on the edge or on the interior with those versatile defensive tackles that are able to create pressure, I think they need to add up front in general and get better pass rushers, because if you look at the numbers from last season, they ranked last in sacks with 20 sacks and last in quarterback hits with 43. And their most productive pass rushers most of the time were cornerbacks and safeties, which just can't be the case, in my opinion. So definitely front seven defensively. Linebackers, you could certainly add there, but I feel like you don't need to that. I mean, you can either draft one in the later rounds, or, there are some interesting guys in free agency that you could potentially go after, some veteran guys that could fill the void left by Roquan Smith. I mean, a Levante David type guy that might not cost you too much. Your top three in cap space, so you could certainly get a veteran and then go draft a guy. But if you improve on the front seven, I feel like your linebackers won't have to be a great defensive line. I believe makes your linebackers better, because the offensive line is then not able to easily get up to the second level, especially in the run game. So I think those go hand in hand. You could certainly add a pass catcher. N'Keal Harry is a free agent. Dante Pettis is a free agent. And then but every draft nowadays is so deep at receiver, so you could certainly add a piece or two there. But you got Chase Claypool, you have Darnell Mooney, you have a couple other guys I like the tight end. Uh, you could add a piece there, but it's not as urgent as the offensive line is. Riley Reef, the guy you mentioned, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He is 34 years old. So, as you said, I would not rely on him. I'd go out and potentially draft a guy or go sign someone. Swing big on the offensive line. So, for me, I think we're kind of on the same page for the Bears. It's defensive line, particularly in my mind, pass rushing ability. Uh, Offensive line, I think you could make some upgrades, although the offensive line was better last year than I think a lot of people think it was. And then just keep adding help for Justin Fields.
Right, exactly. Um, okay, now we can move on to the Houston Texans, the number pick in this year's draft. Um, I'll let you start off with this one.
Well, I think it starts at the quarterback position, right? Um, some people believe in Davis Mills. I certainly don't think he's terrible. I mean, you could technically still roll into the season with him, but I think you're always looking to make an upgrade. And whether that's Bryce Young, we'll see what the Bears decide to do with their number one pick. I assume at this point they're going to roll with Justin Fields and potentially address other needs with that particular pick. So if you're the Texans, you're looking at potentially being able to get the number one guy, um, from a quarterback standpoint in this upcoming draft. And I believe you got to do that. I would take Bryce Young. I feel like with the new head coach uh, and, a new coaching staff, they're going to want to get their guy in there. So I think quarterback is probably the biggest need. Um, and you certainly still got to, build this thing from the inside out on the offensive and defensive lines. I mean, that's really how you're supposed to build a football team. Technically, you could probably use upgrades at all positions if you're Houston, but there were some redeeming qualities of this team. But if it were me, uh, address offensive and defensive line, and then obviously get that franchise quarterback that you so desperately need. I think quarterback is where you have to start, though.
Right, I agree. Um, in my notes for the Houston Texans, I just put yes in capital letters under this team needs segment. I mean, I think um, obviously you address quarterback. I think if Bryce Young is there, you take Bryce Young. 100% you do that every single day of the week. Take Bryce Young. But outside of that, I think there is no position in the draft where you can just have the luxury to take um, like a risk on certain guys. You just take the best player available at every pick. That's how you get the most value that you can. I think late in the draft they have the ability to take some high upside guys and just try and develop because you have time in this rebuild. You just brought in D'Amico Ryans, and this is the time now where you need to start drafting in the mold of what D'Amico Ryans and Nick Casario want. And whatever that is, we don't really know yet, but they need to try and figure out some kind of identity soon because they haven't been able to do that. They're just kind of a stingy, feisty, bad team at the moment. So they need some real talent just so they can get back to some semblance of competence on the football field.
Yeah, it's a roster that was largely devoid of talent. And you just got to start filling out this roster with young, talented players. And with all the draft capital that you have, with the projected close to $40 million in cap space, I mean, you have the assets to go and do that. And I think, like we spoke to when we talked about the head coaching hires in the NFL, D'Amico Ryans is a guy that I believe, and I think that you spoke to this as well, he's going to establish an identity. And that's why we like the hire overall. So just go get guys that you believe fit your system. But yes, we'll address the draft way more in depth later on. But at this point, it should be, I mean, outside of potentially going to get the quarterback, it should be best player available.
Right. Okay. Moving on now to our third team, the Arizona Cardinals. Um, this one's interesting. Um, we've been pretty polarizing on. Or I don't think that's the right word. Um, I guess you could say negative. But me in particular, I've been negative on the Arizona Cardinals over the past like year and a half or so. I just didn't really like the direction they were going in. And for this segment in particular, I said edge, O line, and I think the D line in particular. Um, but mostly just there's a third need. It's just you got to just address the defense in general. Um, D line and cornerback, those are the two main things. You have linebacker set, you have your safety set. Um, but starting off with edge, JJ Watt just retired. He was your best pass rusher. Now you're kind of left with Marcus Golden and kind of some, rotation guys left there. Thomas Sanders. No, not Thomas Sanders, but Thomas and Sanders. Sorry. Um, it's not a whole lot of depth there. That's really the problem with their edge group. I don't think it's particularly terrible, but they need the higher level talent. They just have kind of a bunch of guys that are just okay, like 3 or 4 guys, and then it's just a drop off. There's not a lot of depth, and there's not a lot of high level talent either. So my answer to that would probably be Will Anderson, but we can address that later. That's a whole conversation for a different day. O line, I think Rodney Hudson, their center, could be a potential cut um, candidate just because they need to save some cap space and they're looking at a season where they most likely won't be competitive. So creating some cap room, creating some flexibility might be in their best interest this year. So cutting a guy like Rodney Hudson who regressed a little bit last year, I think definitely should be considered by that front office. And I think you got to address the guard positions. Um, Whether it be in the draft or free agency, you got to figure out at some point what you're going to do at guard. And then the third need, it was kind of ambiguous, but it just comes down to address the interior defensive line and cornerback. I guess that's two different things, but um, they're both like just as important as the other. So I didn't want to just leave one out because both are extremely important for them to address. Because right now, what they have is not adequate. Their cornerback room is just Byron Murphy and everybody else. To be fair, I mean those guys they really struggled last year as a group. Byron Murphy was their main guy, but you got to find guys you can put in and be able to trust.
For me, it starts on the interior offensive line. Your two starting guards, Justin Pugh and Will Hernandez, along with one of your tackles, Kelvin Beachum, they're all unrestricted free agents. Now, if it were me, watching from an outsider's perspective, I would try to re-sign Kelvin Beachum. He's the guy I really like. He's still on the younger side, pretty productive for them. I think you could get him on a pretty team-friendly deal, but you still have Justin Pugh and Will Hernandez going to unrestricted free agency, and you spoke to their veteran center Rodney Hudson, who many around the league that I've, in preparing for this podcast, yes, he could be a potential cut candidate, but he's also maybe possibly a potential retirement candidate as he's getting up there in age. He only played in 4 games last year. He was hurt. So I wouldn't be surprised if he potentially just decided to hang him up. So definitely interior offensive line, you have to address that. Edge rush is for sure. If you want to win in this league, you got to be able to rush the passer. J.J. Watt is gone now. He's retired. Congratulations on a Hall of Fame career. We will talk more about the draft again, but Will Hernandez, I think, could possibly be sitting pretty at number 3, which is where you're at if you're Arizona. So that would probably be an easy pick, and it'll be interesting to see where Jonathan Gannon goes, their new head coach, a defensive head coach. I'm sure he'd be drooling all over on Will Anderson, knowing that coming from Philly, where they had a pretty good pass rush themselves. Right. And then cornerback, the secondary definitely needs help. This is, from what I've seen so far, a pretty good cornerback class. So you can definitely address that position. And then obviously, building through the trenches, we could say this for probably almost every team. There is a need to address on that defensive line. But I do like their linebackers, and I like a couple of the young players that they have on their defensive line. I think addressing cornerback, I'd probably do that first. So I would go interior offensive line, edge rusher, and then cornerback. But they certainly still could use help on the defensive line.
Right. Okay. Now for our 4th team. Let's see here.
I believe it's Indianapolis.
Yes, it is Indy. Man, where do you even start with Indy? I'll let you give your thoughts first.
Well, as we know, the Colts have been going on a quarterback merry-go-round ever since Andrew Luck retired back in 2019. It was an abysmal 2022 season, to put it simply. Firing Frank Reich, the whole Jeff Saturday thing. They ended up hiring. Who was it that they hired again?
It's the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, Shane Steichen.
Steichen. Yeah, I like that. So number 4. You're probably looking at one of those 2 quarterbacks being available. If I had to guess, I think you address the quarterback position. I don't think Sam Ehlinger is that guy, unless you want to go the veteran route, which they absolutely could if they wanted to. I believe you have to address the quarterback position, get your future solidified at the quarterback position. I feel like you could, I feel like they still need another pass catcher. They need a more dynamic weapons on the perimeter. But is that a dire need? Probably not. You need to probably get younger on the offensive line. You've suffered through injuries the past couple of years on the offensive line. I believe you could probably upgrade at a couple positions. Defensively, the Colts have always been pretty solid, but there are a couple places they could upgrade. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. But yeah, I feel like quarterback and another pass catcher jumped to mind. I really like Michael Pittman. I really like the young tight end that they have. I believe out of Virginia.
Cox, is it?
Possibly.
Something Cox.
Yeah. I have to look it up. I'll look it up here in a minute. But you go ahead and give your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the offensive line position you were probably thinking of is right guard. Um, I like where they're at in terms of left tackle. That was a hole for a few years for them, but Bernard Raymond stepped up late in the year, struggled early on, and then really picked things up as the year went on. So I think they're set at left tackle, at least for now. I think right guard is where you look and say, okay, we've got to address that. It's probably not the first thing you look at and say we got to go for this, but definitely something on their list of needs, 100%. As for the quarterback position, I think if I were Chris Ballard, the Colts GM, I have to go young here. I mean, you've gone the veteran route over and over and over again. It hasn't worked. You've been there, done that. I think you have to go the young route and try to develop a guy. And luckily enough for you, you have your pick of the litter between, CJ Stroud, Will Levis, and possibly Anthony Richardson, but I don't know if that would really be a good fit there. But between CJ Stroud and Will Levis, those are two very solid prospects who I think give you a pretty solid floor compared to what most rookie quarterbacks would give you. And they're going to choose between those two most likely. I don't see them going down the road of a veteran again.
Yeah. So Yannick Ngakwe is a free agent. He is unrestricted, so whether they re-sign him or not remains to be seen. But pass rusher certainly, if you're going to lose him, certainly needs to be a focus. Obviously, the right guard position, as you mentioned, they could use an upgrade at that position. Quarterback, and then with Paris Campbell also being an unrestricted free agent, definitely another pass catcher or two could be
Yeah.
could
So
be
you got to be 3 or 4 deep at
yeah.
receiver nowadays. So definitely.
Yeah. So there's the Colts. Let's move on to the number 5 pick, who is
Seattle. Yes, it's Seattle.
yeah.
Seattle Seahawks got this pick via the Denver Broncos through the Russell Wilson trade. Probably the best case scenario for Seattle going into the year happened. You got a top 5 pick, but it's not even your pick. It's the pick you got for Russell Wilson. You're basically getting a top 5 dart throw for free. So here's the thing with Seattle. I think defensive line, you have to address that first and foremost. I really like what you were able to do in draft last year, and obviously everybody does. That draft was absolutely fantastic, and was probably the main factor in Seattle making the playoffs last season. Was the fact they had a all-timer in terms of a draft class. So going into this offseason, it's definitely number one, re-sign Geno Smith. I think that should be a priority. Um, Obviously, it depends on how much money he's gonna want, but he's shown that he can be your franchise guy for the next few years, and you need that stability in your team if you want to keep winning and close out this Pete Carroll era strong because he won't be coaching forever. Um, and then defensively, you need to figure out what you're going to do with Jamal Adams. He's had, he had an injury riddled season last year. So he didn't really have a chance to be playing with last year's iteration of the Seattle defense. But we don't really know where he will fit in next year. And maybe he will slot in and it will work. But I think with how much you're paying him, I think a decision needs to be made on, whether you want to move on with him. I think there's a void built into his contract. So they need to figure out whether they want to use that or not. And then the defensive line, I went this long without mentioning it. Um, that's probably their main need here. Um, Tyree Wilson is a guy I really like out of Texas Tech. He's a guy who's had some comparisons to Javon Walker, the number one overall pick from last year's draft. A really toolsy pass rusher. Toolsy. Um, um, yeah, I'll stop talking now. Pass rusher and signing Geno Smith. Though that's my main points there for Seattle.
Re-signing Geno Smith is a must. Very good last year. One of the reasons they were able to get to the playoffs, obviously, a 30 touchdown guy. Fairly consistent throughout the season. I feel like you could get him for a good price nowadays in the quarterback market. Defensive line is a huge need. This was, to be fair, I'd say a mediocre pass rushing unit last year and a well below average run defense. As we know, we spoke to that when they opened up their playoffs with the San Francisco 49ers. So, and the front four isn't totally at fault for that run defense deficiency, but Pete Carroll has spoken to it. They got to become much better in the trenches, whether that's run stuffing nose tackles, pass rushing defensive tackles, or edge setting run defenders. You're looking at Puna Ford, who's an unrestricted free agent, a guy in that interior of that defense who has been pretty good, but could potentially leave, and that leaves you with little to no depth on the interior. So you have to address that. LJ Collier, one of your outside linebackers, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. I love the Uchenna Nwosu signing from last season. That really helped, but you could still use another guy there. Obviously, I feel like we mentioned pass rush and offensive line for all these teams.
Yeah.
Seattle's offensive line, thank God you finally got a tackle position figured out. You hit on 2 tackles in last year's draft. Fantastic for you. I feel like you could still upgrade on the interior. One of your guards is going to be actually your center, Austin Blythe. I believe it's how you say his name. And then one of your guards is going into free agency. So whether you re-sign those guys or you go out and try to upgrade, could be a good idea. But I feel like since you have your tackle situated now, that becomes a little bit less worrisome because I feel like their offensive line was pretty solid last year compared to what it has been. So, yeah, I think re-signing Geno Smith, addressing that defensive line, and then you could go a lot of different directions if you're Seattle from there. But if you just upgrade on that defensive line and re-sign Geno Smith, I mean, you're already looking at potentially a much better team if they improve upon that run defense and their pass rush from last season.
Right, exactly. One other thing I'll say is cornerback. They drafted Tariq Woolen last year, who was top 3 in defensive rookie of the year, obviously very deserving of that. But opposite him, I think you could look at upgrading. You have Michael Jackson, you have Kobe Bryant. Those are 2 young guys that Seattle invested, late to mid-round picks in. But I think going into next year, I think you're going to want to upgrade the number 2 corner spot.
Absolutely. Let's address our last team.
All right, last one day. Let's see here.
I believe it's the Detroit Lions.
Yeah. It's always an interesting conversation when you bring up Detroit. This one was via the Rams. Detroit had a really good season last year. Dan Campbell and company, they just really, it all clicked. They had their moments where they kind of Lions it up, like that Panthers game late in the year where they kind of botched their playoff chances. But, I mean, there's a lot they can hang their hat on going into next year. They just have to build up that defense. So for me, my top three needs were corner. Obviously, you have Jeff Okuda, but outside of Jeff Okuda, I think you got to look at upgrading the depth there and also just having a number two corner opposite Jeff Okuda. They like to play a lot of man coverage, so it's really essential that they have two guys that they can trust. And then defensive tackle, Lee McNeil, I really like. I really like that pick when they made it a couple years back. He's really developed into a borderline star, a guy who I think could be a bona fide star next year. But outside of him, you gotta upgrade. Outside of him, it's just really I don't want to say soft, but it's exploitable. It's definitely a weakness on the team, and they got run like straight up the middle so many times last year, and it's because of that weak interior. Um, and then lastly, this one not quite as important because I think the guys that you have at the moment could be adequate, but I put tight end here simply because I think with their offense, they like to run a lot of 21 personnel, being able to run the football. Um, Having a good tight end is really also the fact that Jared Goff really giving those big targets he can trust. He's not a guy who extends plays, so he has to have those jump ball wide receivers where he can just put the ball up and trust that they can go make a play. So tight end was my last need.
Detroit was a very good team last year, and some would say that they deserves that final playoff spot over Seattle. Now, I don't get into that conversation, but I wouldn't necessarily poo-poo that. The people who argue that, I mean, this offense at times was explosive. And think about it, you're going to get a full season of Jamison Williams next year. So hopefully having him healthy, plus all the other weapons that they have with St. Brown and everyone else. I know that DJ Chark is an unrestricted free agent, and you can always add receivers. I mean, you can never have enough of those in today's NFL. But it's not an immediate need. I don't see any immediate needs offensively. It's a good to great run blocking offensive line. Jared Goff, totally serviceable, almost got this team to the playoffs. Can you win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff? Probably not, but he's been there before. And if you surround him with the adequate team and pieces, we've seen that he can get you there. So I think you stick with Jared Goff and your offense outside of maybe a couple pieces here and there, like supplementary pieces, whether that's a tight end, another pass catcher. I think you're good to go offensively. We'll see what they do with Jamal Williams, who is also a free agent, but that'll be interesting. But for me, Detroit, I mean, you solidified your pass rush a little bit last year, getting Aiden Hutchinson,
Right.
but Michael Brocker's free agent. A lot of these defensive linemen that they have, Isaiah Buggs, free agent. So I think defensive line, especially on the interior, high need. Mike Hughes at the cornerback position, he's a free agent. You got to get someone opposite Jeff Okuda, who, let's be honest, he's been serviceable. He's been good at times, but some would say he's not been, what some thought he would be so far. Maybe not worthy of that number 3 pick. They haven't drafted another corner in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. The Melon Wanfu guy that they did draft 2 years ago is now playing safety. So they definitely need to upgrade at the cornerback position opposite Jeff Okuda. I'd even add in safety to this discussion. Deshaun Elliott's a free agent. You have some guys in your secondary who are free agents. So I think defense in general, keep addressing the interior defensive line, address your secondary. And if you have a good pass rush, a good run defending defensive line with a solid secondary, it doesn't even have to be great. I feel like you can do a lot of different things with your linebackers, whoever they may be. I don't know particularly what Detroit's cap space situation is looking like. According to CBS Sports, they're projected. Let me get to that.
My guess is it would be well in the positive. My guess is it would be like around 20 million, 30 million.
Yeah, about 19 million projected, but there are ways you can manipulate the cap to get beyond that. So I expect that to happen. I really like where they are. I mean, a couple upgrades here and there, and you're potentially talking about a playoff team next year. So, yeah, I mean, Detroit's very interesting. And I believe they have 2 first-round picks, I believe. Could be
Yes, they do.
mistaken.
Yeah. This
So
pick and then number 18, their own pick.
So it'll be interesting. We'll start doing mock drafts, looking at mock drafts, reacting to different mock drafts online is something that I want to start doing soon. But yeah, absolutely. Detroit's an interesting one.
Yeah, before we move on from Detroit, I just want to put this out into the universe. I really want Detroit to do Anthony Richardson. I know it's like it's not, it's not probably the greatest thing for their team like immediately. Definitely not. But I just think it would be a perfect fit. If he drops to 18, great. But even if you got to trade up for him, go up to like the 12th pick, I think it's a risk worth taking. But we'll get into draft season later. If you don't know, Anthony Richardson is the quarterback from Florida, and he's just he's raw, but he's got so much potential. He's got all the tools you could think of. I mean, I kind of describe him. That franchise guy made a really good analogy. He's basically everyone's Madden creative player. You basically go all the way up on arm strength, all the way up on mobility, and then whenever you run out of ticks at awareness or accuracy, then so be it. You can figure that out later. That's basically Anthony Richardson in a nutshell. So, okay, that's going to do it for the NFL segment for the day. Now we get into NBA. So we have a couple topics we'll touch on, but this is just going to be a open discussion, like we said, like we have in the title. It's not going to be overly structured. We're going to touch on our main topics, which is going to be obviously Nate McMillan getting fired by the Atlanta Hawks, and then Russell Westbrook heading to the LA Clippers. But after that, we'll just see where the conversation takes us, and then we'll kind of wrap things up right around an hour 15, an hour 10. So let's get right into it. Let's start with the Hawks situation. I think it. I mean, it is what it is. You kind of could see it coming. There was rumblings around the team for months and months about Nate McMillan and Trae Young butting heads, and it's just been interesting to see the narrative around Trae Young kind of switch. I've seen obviously it's Twitter. It's not like the most you know informative place to be in terms of sports talk, obviously. But I've seen a lot of people saying, "Oh, Trae Young's a coach killer. You can't win with him." Yada yada yada. It's just been interesting to see this narrative shift completely around with Trae Young. I definitely don't think that's the case. That's definitely not the case. But I do think it's interesting that he's gone through 2 different head coaches, and it's ended in a similar way both times. And it's also worth noting that coming out of the All-Star break, they immediately blew out the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's a really good playoff team. So is it just going to magically start clicking again once they, get Nate Mcmillan out of the building? It's going to be interesting to see, but um, it's definitely, you know, history is just kind of repeating itself. I don't think they'll make the Eastern Conference Finals run this time around, but um, it's just weird to see it happen the exact same way twice.
Absolutely. You know, and I think the thing is, right, and you spoke to it, the narrative has shifted around Trae Young, and that's certainly a different conversation. But I think this was about, I think from an outsider's perspective, sort of looking into this situation with the Hawks, they come out of the All-Star break 29-30, one game under 500. Right now, they're 30-30. They just beat the Cavaliers, as you mentioned, sitting in the 8th seed in the East. So right now, they would be in the play-in tournament. And likely would probably still make the playoff field if I had to guess, but you don't know that. It would depend on who they match up with, I think. This was supposed to be a year where I think the Hawks, thought they'd be a little bit better of a spot than they are right now. 29-30 coming out of the All-Star break. You went out and you got DeJounte Murray, that second guy next to Trae Young. You made some other moves. It's largely the same roster from last year. I feel like not only that, but there were some heated exchanges between Trae Young and Nate McMillan. And I feel like most of the time, it's a star player coach relationship sours like that. From an outsider's perspective, at least, they're going to pick the player over the coach, especially in the NBA. So, you spoke to it. They fired Lloyd Pierce in the middle of that year, 2 years ago. Things started clicking. They got to the Eastern Conference Finals. I'd argue they have a better roster now than they had then with the addition of DeJounte Murray. You're not in like a total, unrecoverable situation right now. Things start to click. You could potentially move up to the 7th seed, possibly the 6th seed if one of those teams falls down a little bit. But yeah, I feel like this just came down to potentially that sort of relationship, the player-coach synergy between Trae Young and Nate McMillan soured a little bit, and that happens. And things just weren't clicking the way that you've seen them in years past. In fact, things had started to regress a little bit under Nate McMillan, who I still believe is a very good NBA basketball coach. It just wasn't the right fit any longer. Now, before we move on, reports are saying, Woj has reported this, Shams has reported this. All the major NBA sources are reporting that as soon as tomorrow, Quinn Snyder could become the next head coach of the Atlanta Hawks. What are your thoughts on that, if that happens?
Well, I think it's a good fit, definitely. Quinn Snyder is a coach who has administered, top level defenses year over year, and obviously Rudy Gobert had a lot to do with that, 100%. But there is something to be said about a coach who you put him in there, and his defensive philosophy immediately makes a difference, and that's what it did for the Jazz all those years ago. And I think for the Hawks, they have some pieces there to where they can defend at a higher level than what they're doing right now. I like Onyeka Okongwu. He's a guy that I think will make Clint Capella expendable in the next couple of years, if not right now. Obviously, the trade deadline already passed, but Onyeka Okongwu is a guy who I think you can throw in the starting lineup, and their defensive lineup immediately just changes. The versatility between him, DeJounte Murray, and John Collins being able to guard multiple positions. It's really important, and I think the Hawks. I don't know if they'll go far, obviously, but going into next year, they got to figure this out. They made a win now move. They traded 3 first-round picks, and I said it even at the time. I don't think trading 3 first-round picks was the right decision, just because they're further away than just a DeJounte Murray trade. As good as DeJounte Murray is, they should have had the foresight to see that they were further away than just that, which is ultimately why I think they ended up parting ways with that front office group. That general manager, something Shank, I think they ended up getting rid of them and moving on because they made a win now move and it just didn't work.
Yeah, I really like Quinn Snyder. He's a guy I've spoken highly of, I believe, on this podcast when he was the coach of the Utah Jazz. For me, it's just all about, the fit with Trae Young. What is going to get the best out of your star player? And I think Quinn Snyder is totally capable of that. And look, reports are saying that he would start as soon as this week. So even if things don't end up going the way that you want them to, you can't quite turn this ship around this season. You can Quinn Snyder can at least get a feel for what he's working with over the next 20-ish games. Plus, they'll probably be in the play-in, barring something drastic happening. Plus, maybe a couple playing games, maybe a playoff series. He can get a feel for this roster, what this roster needs, and he can start to build those relationships with Trae Young, with DeJounte Murray, with the players that are here on this Atlanta Hawks team. And he's an experienced guy. So I believe it's a good hire. As long as they do their due diligence. I know it's hard to do a coaching search in the middle of the season, but if they feel like Quinn Snyder's the guy, I mean, go ahead and do that. Get him in right now. Let him get a feel for this and go from there.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on. I think there's interesting conversations to be had about the LA Clippers at the moment. At the moment, they're sitting in the 4th spot. They just lost a few days ago to the team in the number 3 spot, the Sacramento Kings, in double overtime, by the way. If you haven't seen the highlights of that game, definitely go check that out. You had multiple guys scoring 40, like 3 or 4 of them even. But that's another conversation for another day. Just from the Clippers' perspective here, I think Russell Westbrook, it's a move where, Russell Westbrook gives them something they needed. They wanted a guy who can push the pace a little bit, push the ball up the floor, bring some energy. This Clippers team feels kind of dead at times. I know it's just, the ups and downs of the regular season, obviously, but I just think at different points in times, they just haven't been able to find that consistency for whatever reason. I think Russell Westbrook will give them that injection of energy. Now, whether he'll be able to play in the 4th quarter, that's definitely a fair question because, this move points to the Clippers just saying, we're not going to play 5 out anymore. We're going to, go more to a traditional style lineup with Russ and Zubats now being 2 non-shooters on the floor at the same time. And that really changes things a lot because the Clippers really rely on their spacing. They really want to have all the space possible for Kawhi and PG to operate. And with Russ on the floor, things are really going to change. So I think I like him on the floor in spurts, but depending on how Tyronn Lue chooses to use Russell Westbrook, I think this could either go great or it could go horribly wrong. We'll just have to see.
I don't necessarily hate it. I think this could work. But my question lies with what is the role for Russell Westbrook on this team? You obviously mentioned they wanted to fill a particular need with this move. It's, I think, a lower risk, higher reward move if it ends up working out. But for me, this was a Clippers team that I can't remember who it was. I may have read it somewhere or I heard someone say it. This was a Clippers team that, they aren't necessarily a Ferrari in terms of their pace of play. They're more like a Bentley. Now, they can give you that sort of change of pace at times, but they're meant to play a slower, more methodical style of basketball with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Play good defense and more methodical style of basketball in the offensive end. Recently, as of January 6th, they had inserted Terrence Mann into their starting lineup, a guy who I really like. And it has elevated their offense from particularly, every aspect you can look at statistically. Since January 6th, the Clippers are scoring 119 points per 100 possessions with units featuring Terrence Mann, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard. That's championship caliber, offensive efficiency right there. They're outscoring their opponents by 7.8 points per 100 possessions, and they're shooting 52% from the field and 42.6% on three-pointers with the Mann, Leonard, Paul George trio on the floor since January 6th, and that is from an article over on CBS Sports that was published today. In the five-man starting lineup of Terrence Mann, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and Zubats had been outscoring opponents by almost 15 points per 100 possessions. And they're 7-3 when starting those five players. So if you're going to insert Russell Westbrook into the starting lineup, you're obviously probably taking out Terrence Mann, who you've developed really good chemistry with in that starting lineup on the offensive end of the floor. So my question is then, is he coming in to be the starter, or is he going to be in that same type of bench role that he was with the Los
Lakers.
Angeles Lakers? So sorry, there's someone honking their horn outside of my apartment. So if it's the bench role, I like it. But if it's the starting role, I'm not so sure I love that so much for those particular reasons. But I mean, for me, it's a lower risk, higher reward scenario. And this Clippers team, from a roster standpoint, was already built to make a Western Conference Finals run if they're healthy. Potentially a NBA Finals if they're healthy. I mean, Kawhi Leonard is back to being superstar Kawhi Leonard.
Right.
So, and with Paul George playing well too, it bodes well for them. They're built to defend. They can match up with and switch with every team in the West, I believe. We'll see what the Suns look like, but they definitely have enough from a perimeter defensive standpoint and a rim protection standpoint. This is a team built to win a championship, and you just added, a Hall of Fame caliber player in Russell Westbrook, who was playing well off the bench in Los Angeles. And can give you that energy, can give you a spark on nights where you don't necessarily have that, because it can be easy to fall into these lulls during the NBA regular season. So for me, I like this move. I'm not poo-pooing it by any stretch of the imagination, but I want to see what his role ends up being.
Yeah, and I'm going to quiz the Stat King real quick. So since the LA Clippers have moved to LA from San Diego, they've had two former MVPs on their roster, Russell Westbrook, and who was the other?
Ooh. Two former MVPs on their roster.
Since moving to Los Angeles. So that was the 1975 season, I believe.
Damn.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I can give you a hint. Let me think. He played his college basketball at UCLA.
What era was he in? Like, when did he play? You know?
70s, 70s, 80s.
It's likely I'm not going to get this. You should just tell me.
It's Bill Walton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a tough one. I just wanted to give you a little test there, but I do want to switch gears though. I want to have a quick conversation about the Phoenix Suns and kind of what the overall feeling should be around them going into this new Kevin Durant era. I've seen a lot of talk about, Kevin Durant, he moved to another super team, yada yada yada. But here's the reality, in my opinion. This Phoenix Suns basketball team was a 500 basketball team before Kevin Durant got there, and the last couple weeks here and there, they've kind of had a boost from obviously getting a little bit healthier, but they're 5 games over 500. About that, this is not a super team before Kevin Durant got there. Absolutely not. Kevin Durant, if the Phoenix Suns win a championship, it's gonna be Kevin Durant that puts them over the top. So, I think discrediting that by just saying, "Oh, he's just on another super team," I think that's just false. I think if you put it simply, we said it in the 2021 finals run, by the way, for the Phoenix Suns. Um, you know, Devin Booker is obviously a top 15 player or so, top 10 on some nights. But I would put him in the star category, in the upper star category. I wouldn't put him in the superstar category. And then Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton, I think, are upper tier role players. With Ayton being a little bit ambiguous at times, he can kind of fluctuate being star level at some nights. But with that being said, I think, Kevin Durant is the guy on this team. So, kind of the narratives on Twitter, I just wanted to set the record straight. If the Phoenix Suns win this title, he is, as Charles Barkley would say, the bus driver. So, I think if they're able to pull this off, whether it be this year or next year, I think we got to stop with the, Kevin Durant can't do it without a perfect team narrative.
Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. And you look at the Suns, not only are they not a super team, as they were 500 not too long ago, now they're heating up a little bit. Devin Booker's back. They're the number 4 seed in the West, 2 games back of the Sacramento Kings for the number 3 seed. Sacramento's playing really good basketball right now. There's still a good portion of the season left, 20-ish games. But if Sacramento keeps playing the way that they are, it might be hard to catch them. But inserting Kevin Durant back into this lineup as early as I believe this coming Wednesday, he'll make his debut for Phoenix. I'm pretty sure he was not going to do that tomorrow, but there were rumors that he could. But from what I've heard, that's not going to happen. The only real other star in this team is Devin Booker. And he's not, he's not a superstar. Kevin Durant is the guy on this team. And that's why Phoenix made this move. You mortgage your future, you give up some depth pieces, some really good role players, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, because you want to get a top 3 player in the world and a guy score from everywhere, do a little bit of everything for you, and elevate you to a championship. Ayton, on his good nights, is probably an all-star caliber player. I'm not so sure about Chris Paul at this point, but he's still a very good point guard. But, those guys, I think you put it perfectly, are like borderline higher end role players, sometimes lower end stars, like all-star caliber players at this point. So, and with the sort of, I would argue, not lacking depth, they have some guys that are capable. I mean, Torrey Craig I like him as a solid piece coming off the bench. They have some other pieces, but it's not the deepest team in the world.
Right.
So I think, it's not a perfect team. I mean, you said it perfectly. I can't really say much else than that. So Kevin Durant is going to be the guy that determines whether or not the Phoenix Suns wins a championship in the next 2 to 3 years. And
Right.
I cannot wait to see what this looks like. And once that happens, an episode in the next week or two, we'll be doing our Western Conference tiers. I think that would be an excellent segment.
Right, exactly. We just got to see the dust settle a little bit before we do that, of course. But I just really wanted to point that out because there's a lot of um, obviously there's a lot of people that hate Kevin Durant, as there are with a lot of players. But with the arc that Kevin Durant has had in his career, with some of the stuff that he does on Twitter, some people react to that the wrong way. But he's not, just because he doesn't act how you would think a star player would act on Twitter, but doesn't mean that he's like somehow less than somehow or insecure somehow. He's just part of a different generation. That's just what it is. He's a different personality. It's basically what I'm trying to say. But I'm definitely a huge fan of Kevin Durant, and I'm definitely going to be rooting for him in particular to prove the doubters wrong here in the next couple of years. And hopefully we get a Suns Warriors series here in the next couple of years as well, because, the basketball gods have the tendency to play with us, to play with our emotions. Whenever we want a matchup, we don't get it, whether it be, LeBron versus Kobe or the Battle of LA. It's just the stars never seem to align. But for that matchup in particular, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that we need to hit on right now before we wrap this episode up?
Not really. I think we can talk a little bit about the game tonight between the Celtics and the Sixers, just because I think that was a really important game in the hierarchy of the Eastern Conference.
Right.
If you look at, if the Sixers were to have won that game, they moved not only a step closer to the 1 seed, but I think at that point, the Celtics would have moved down to the 2nd seed to be tied with the Milwaukee Bucks, and that the Sixers would have been 1 game back. So that would have really changed things. But with the Celtics pulling out that game on the road, they kept their number 1 seed lead. And with the Milwaukee Bucks surging, every tight win you can grab is just so important, so crucial. And the main point I'm going to make is the number 2 seed is going to have a complete disadvantage. Well, obviously, as they should, but they're going to have a much tougher road through the Eastern Conference than the 1 seed will. I think after the first three teams, that being the Celtics, the Bucks, and the Sixers, is a bit of a drop off with the Cavs and whatever else teams you want to mention there. So being the number 1 seed is going to be so important for whether it be the Bucks or the Celtics, or maybe the Sixers if they somehow get their cards in that hat, I guess.
Yeah, that was a fantastic game. And really the main thing I'm watching is, I think with the two performances that Joel Embiid has put up, the 2 games since coming out of the All-Star break, a comeback win against Memphis on Thursday night where he made significant plays, not only offensively, but on the defensive end of the floor. It's like that two-way star, blocking shots in key moments, making stands, getting important rebounds, and then obviously doing what he does on the offensive end as the second leading scorer in the NBA. I mean, golly gee, the man is just special to watch. And I think if he continues this, he's making his claim for, NBA MVP, in my opinion. I know Giannis
Definitely.
is making a good case. And I realize that, Milwaukee's ahead of Philly in the standings, and Denver is first in the West, and Jokic obviously has another good argument. But I watched the 2 games that I've watched out of this All-Star break have both been Philly games, and Joel Embiid has certainly, I think, starting to make his claim. Maybe not consciously. He's not probably thinking about that. But I think he's pushing for that MVP award. And
Definitely. I
I
think
think go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah,
No,
Embiid has taken a step up this year. There's no question about it. I just from just the eye test alone, I'm not really backing this up with any numbers or anything like that. He's playing with force this year. I think in years past, you've seen him a lot, settle for those mid-range jumpers, take a lot of three-point shots, and he still does that. But when he gets in the post now, he won't hesitate to put a shoulder into you and just back you all the way down to the basket. And I think to me that's the difference. It's more of a mixture of a Shaq-like presence with his amazing footwork and skill, which is just impossible to stop. And that's really what's made the difference. And then defensively, he's been amazing. It's just there's no question about it. His body is in a place where he's healthy and he's just completely, in tune with everything. He's in shape. And hopefully it lasts. Obviously, knock on wood. We don't want anything bad to happen, but he's just in top form right now.
Yeah, I think utilizing his size is something that you pointed out on the offensive end, especially in the post. I feel like his injury history could have played a part into some of his, not necessarily like non-aggressiveness on the offensive end, but just like that physicality where he's not afraid to just use his size and score in the post at will if he needs to. And with his footwork, with his ability to shoot the mid-range shot, ability to stretch to the 3, ability to put the ball on the floor, with step backs, fadeaways, everything in the book, it's with his abilities that he's showcasing on the defensive end. I mean, it's certainly fun to watch, but something also is, Boston was able to win that game despite Jason Tatum not having a particularly great game. Now, he did make the go-ahead shot on a fantastically drawn-up play. But, and that was a game of runs. Boston was down, and they made a run. They took the lead, and Philly came back. But I was impressed with Boston, too. I think they just continue to win. And man, we might have to reassess the Eastern Conference tiers as well here pretty soon.
Yeah, definitely. I think tonight's game was definitely a testament to Boston's depth, 100%. Tatum was struggling. Brown was, you know, getting to his spots, but maybe not as efficient as he would have liked to be with obviously that face injury that he's dealing with. So other guys had to step up. Derek White, Horford, um, Marcus Smart was doing what Marcus Smart things, drawing offensive fouls, getting under people's skin. I mean, those little things like that it's just winning plays. That's why Boston loves Marcus Smart. It's just because he affects winning so much. It's not even just it's not about him being able to put up 20 points per game. He just affects winning in a such a profound way. Um, I think Boston, with their defensive talent, if they can just find enough consistency on the offensive end, they're just going to be so tough to beat in the playoffs. And Malcolm Brogdon, to me, is the key to all of it. He's the playmaker that they kind of needed last year to control the pace of the game and make good decisions. Here, when they drive into the paint, you saw so many times they lose the ball or make a bad read. Malcolm Brogdon is a steady hand trust in that sense.
Absolutely. So I think we should wrap it up right about now. We could go for hours talking about the NBA. So, we'll have another episode probably in the next couple days. Hopefully we'll keep on going with our team needs. I really like that segment. Probably do picks 7 to 12, something like that, on our next episode. College basketball. I mean, last week of the regular season, we're pushing towards conference tournaments the week after this coming week, and then March Madness. I mean, it will be there before you know it. So we might do some college basketball content. Or we might just hop right into our NBA tiers segments once again. So we'll see what happens. But thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe once again. We greatly appreciate that. Leave in the comments if you're a fan of one of those top 6 teams in the draft. What do you think your team needs to do in the offseason? What positions do they need to address? Or if you have thoughts on the NBA topics that we just spoke on, what are your thoughts on that? Who do you have as of right now as your sort of championship tier in the NBA? We love more fan engagement, and recommend this to your friends, your family, if they like sports as well. We greatly appreciate that. Any parting shots, concluding remarks before we sign off?
I'll just kick back off what you just said. Definitely hit the share button as well. We don't really talk about that enough. Just sharing it with other people, that helps us a lot. And then also, me and my stepmom actually started a new podcast that we're going to do on F1 exclusively. That'll be coming out soon. Definitely stay tuned for that. And that's it.
Awesome. That's good to know. I'm someone, as you know, if you checked out our last Patreon podcast that we recorded last week, that's still trying in the process of learning F1. So definitely go check that out. And we'll be talking about that more on this podcast as well.
Right. That podcast is available for free, by the way, on Patreon. We put it out for free just because we really enjoyed making that, and we wanted to make it available to y'all without, subscribing to that or anything. So that's available for free. That'll be in the link in the description. And I'll let you sign us off here. We went a little bit longer than we intended here.
we're right around where we've sort of been on our longer-ish episodes. So just like Nate McMillan's coaching career in Atlanta, and just like 9 top 25 college basketball teams' chances of winning today, as they lost, we are going, gone. Peace out.
Peace out.